Good morning again. Good morning. It is such a joy to be here and get to do all the things I love to do here with all these wonderful people and all of you. I am so grateful for the invitation and to be with you again. I love stories. One of my favorite quotes is from the American writer Willa Cather, who said that there are really only 2 or 3 fundamental human stories, but they keep repeating themselves over and over as if they had never been told. It gives me a sense of purpose in telling a story that unites us all, that there is relevance in the stories we tell. So I want to start with one. I recently celebrated my 30th anniversary of ordination into the ministry. And it has had me reflecting on the beginning of that. And I recall my very first class at the Starking School for the Ministry and the Pacific School for Religion, where I went and studied. And my very first class was on homiletics, which is a fancy word for preaching. And we were all of us, mostly first-year students, and we were all so eager to get in there and say the fiery word and hone our skills in preaching theology and moving lives with our eloquence. And the professor, who, blessed be his name, is Ron Cook, taught there for many, many years, and he would have none of that. The very first class, which lasted about 3 hours, he interspersed his teachings of preaching and storytelling by telling us stories of what it was like to hire first-year seminary students to go to Santa Cruz and to help he and his wife build their little respite, their getaway. And, he told us harrowing and funny and provocative stories that all had a point, about floors that weren't exactly level, or trusses that weren't exactly true, doors that either wouldn't shut or stayed shut when they weren't intended to. And all of this, I think, was to tell us that Jesus was a carpenter. Clearly we weren't. And he also preached the Sermon on the Mount, which surely we hadn't yet. So all of this was to humble us in some ways, but at the end of the class, near the end of the class, he said this remarkable thing. He said that stories are true whether or not the events in them actually happened, which was to take a veil off of all these stories that have been telling us, were they actual or were they not? But yet, they all resonated with the truth. We all could they were relevant to us. We could connect with them. And it awakened in me a passion to learn more about stories and storytelling. And I had the opportunity early in my ministry to spend time with an Oneganakan elder, that's a portion of British Columbia up in Canada. And they taught me the power of storytelling and expressly the difference between native stories and European-based stories. And I'll give you one quick reference point. You all know the story of Hansel and Gretel, right? It doesn't end well for the witch who represents evil. In the European side, or telling of the tale, the witch is unceremoniously pushed into the oven, the door is shut, and evil dies, right? Done with that, good triumphs over evil, let them all live happily ever after. That's sort of the dominant kind of European Western approach. In the native telling of a similar tale, the evil representation, the witch, if you will, is cast into a fire, and they die, but their sparks, the remains, come up into the air and take the form of mosquitoes, teaching us that evil is never really overcome. But I tell these stories, the point here is the point made by both the Anagonkan elder and Ron Cook is this, that stories, though they may be full of exaggeration or even fictional accounts, are not just stories. They are actually teachings, and they are critical to our understanding of ourselves and our worldview. According to evolutionary psychologists and literary Darwinists, two fields I never knew existed before researching this, our brains are hardwired to think in terms of stories. It's only within the last few hundred years that a majority of people were able to read, but no training is required for us to learn or hear a story. Storytelling is so instinctive to us that we barely realize that we are doing it, or that as we do it, we are organizing our thoughts and naming meaning to our experiences. We are naturally compelled to tell stories. Through stories, we preserve and transmit our memories and our values and our cultures, the people in our lives, for better and for worse. And the stories we tell serve to tell the world who we are, what we think about the world, and our place in it. For me, they are essential, even fundamental, to the art and practice of preaching and of life. What's more, a study conducted at Stanford University suggests that a story is 22% more memorable than facts. A fact which sounds great in a sermon about stories. Images, feelings, evoked by stories help us to recall our own similar stories, and so we internalize their messages, each in our own unique way, yet sharing that experience. We can potentially develop empathy because we recognize our own experiences, dreams, strengths, and foibles in the stories of others. When stories expose us to different ways of being, different cultures, we become more flexible and creative in our responses to the world around us, and we may become inspired to change, to grow, thereby expanding our worldview, our circle of love, changing who we are, becoming different people than we were, the people we need to become. Of course, depending on the stories we are exposed to, the opposite can and does occur. But stories and art, poetry and music, the free reign of the creative imagination, can provide truths in a unique and engaging way, even though the details of what actually happened in the piece may be completely made up. The underlying awareness may point to something irrefutably real, and in that sense, stories, understood as fiction, can be true. And as we are all aware, nonfiction can be a lie, even when it apparently tells what happened. And I want to provide a serious example from the headlines of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune of May 25th, 2020. On Monday evening, shortly after 8 p.m., officers from the Minneapolis Police Department responded to the 3700 block of Chicago Avenue South on a report of a forgery in process. Officers were advised that the suspect was sitting on top of a blue car and appeared to be under the influence. Two officers arrived and located the suspect, a male believed to be in his 40s, in his car. He was ordered to step from his car. After he got out, he physically resisted officers. Officers were able to get the suspect into handcuffs and noted he appeared to be suffering medical distress. Officers called for an ambulance. He was transported to Hennepin County Municipal Center by ambulance, where he died a short time later. Now that is a story about what happened the night that George Floyd died, was murdered. That was the initial police report. A police report would certainly be categorized as a nonfiction account. And yet, thanks to the video recorded by Darnella Frazier, we know that, for what it left out as much as what it included, this was not a true account. And the jury, in the Derek Chauvin, the officer involved, his trial decided too that it was not a true account. You see, there are stories that seek to move us closer to the truth, both fiction and nonfiction. And there are stories that are designed to obscure, distract, or redirect us from finding the truth, both fiction and nonfiction, either by what they include or what they do not include, or both. Our stories are powerful. And power is not inherently good or bad. It is simply power to be used. And one of the reasons I talk about stories here and how our stories are created and the almost limitless potentials of reviewing, renewing, revising, and transforming our stories is precisely so we can be mindful and intentional about the use of this power in the very critical days that lie ahead of us as a people. For stories are a fundamental part of the human condition and essential in nurturing our spiritual growth and setting the direction of our lives, individually, communally, and as a nation. Understanding this allows for approaching and entering into many stories among individuals and within individuals, and it requires a rigorous honesty and a deep humility and a commitment to the truth of the stories we tell and how they shape us for the better or the worse. And there's always more than one story to consider. Author Chimamanda Adichie tells us in her incredibly enlightening TED Talk of 2014 the story of growing up in Nigeria as an avid and early reader, mostly of British and American children's books. By the time she was 7, this early reading turned into early writing, and she began to craft her first stories in pencil with crayon illustrations. And as she tells it, all of her early characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow, they ate apples, and they talked incessantly about the weather. Oh, how lovely it was that the sun has come out. This, she says, despite the fact that she lived in Nigeria, where it never snowed, they ate mangoes, and they never talked about the weather because there was no need to. Adichie says her limited reading exposure created in her this limited idea about what literature meant, making her believe that a real story had nothing to do with her everyday experience. It was only once she learned about and started reading African writers that she had that big aha that inspired her to weave together the fantasy of her early reading with her real-life experiences. Reflecting on this, it is clear that sometimes stories are told in order to connect ourselves with others and with others' stories. And sometimes stories are told and repeated over and over in order to silence all other stories. Understanding these aspects of the stories we hear and tell, the stories we live out, and the stories we are living into, it's always been important, but it feels particularly relevant to this time and to this place. This place and this time abuzz with accusations of fake news and conspiracy theories and alternative facts and revisionist history and relentless bald-faced lies. This place and this time when truth has become a matter of stubbornly arrogant determination rather than humble exploration. This place and this time we are living in when fiction cannot even keep up with the fabrications that pass for reality, and nonfiction strains even the most fearless imaginations. Israeli writer Amos Oz writes, "A society in crisis teaches itself to congeal into one story only and sees reality through very narrow glasses. But there is never only one story." And like the blindfolded friends before the elephant, we must collectively remove the blinders and see the whole of the truth through the stories we may wish not to hear. For those of us who have ears to hear, we know that our current administration, our current president, and others in positions of leadership are doing and saying awful, hurtful, even dangerous things. And it seems our country is in the midst of an administrative coup defined by the illegal overthrow of a government, but achieved primarily without violence and relying heavily by simply claiming powers, intimidation, bullying, extortion, threatening media, and thereby seizing all powers. And so I believe we are living in an administrative coup. Actions that constitute this coup include the stories circulating in what is called the news, including the news agency Reuters, reporting that Elon Musk has seized all personal and payroll records and locked out government workers. The illegal firings of government watchdogs, often in direct retaliation for their oversight of the illegal actions. The attempted seizure of over $3 trillion of federal funding for the common good. The unconstitutional attempt to end birthright citizenship and what media casually called test to the limits of presidential authority. Suing media and companies to get them to comply and pay the president money. Overt intimidation of government workers and asking for loyalty above all else, not to the Constitution, but to a single person. The legal but terrifying pardoning of violent insurrectionists. The first time any sitting president has freed those who violently tried to help them seize power. Breathe with me. Amidst all of these stories of chaos, we must remain focused on telling and promoting and repeating again and again a different story, different stories, to secure a different outcome in this place and this time. For now is the time. The prophet Adrienne Marie Brown writes, "Remember, people, the future is unwritten. We are not in their story, even if we are impacted by it. We have to keep willing to live our stories, the ones where justice and love and equity and material well-being and care and connection and freedom and safety and dignity and grace and belonging and the earth, and again, love, are at the center. We must remove and help one another remove the blindfolds of fear that keep us separated from each other's stories, to recognize and manifest at a spiritual level that we are a community of stories, bound to one another by a gospel of love that will never let us go. The gospel of love is a search for truth and meaning, and it is about the stories we create to ground ourselves in what is real and true and to listen deeply to the stories and realities of others, especially the marginalized, the disadvantaged, those targeted as the other. Let us remember, no one is outside the circle of love. That is the good news we must tell and retell and tell again. Our lives become restoried and restored in these new stories that shape our lives whenever we expand our circle of love. We display our stories in the ways in which we respond lovingly to one another and to life itself. The sorrows that have broken our hearts open, the injustices that arouse our righteous anger, the embarrassments we survive, the mistakes we've made, the lessons we've learned. the communities we've helped to nourish in the vast, interconnected network of our stories, the stories of our lives. It is important, essential, to continue to be aware of our stories as we strive to know ourselves better and grow together in spirit. It is so vitally important to listen to one another's stories as we strive to understand one another more deeply. It is important to realize that we are not simply creatures responding to the stimuli of the world. We are, all of us, co-creators, artists even, writers, and we're writing a new page every day in the storying and restorying of our lives in the world with faith and hope, and the greatest of these, love. As the song we're about to sing now teaches, it is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. Amen. Ashe. Namaste. May it be so.